What's going on, everybody? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the California Underground. We have back here again tonight as part of our third legislative roundup. And this is why it's important to continually do these legislative roundups because bills get introduced, bills die in committee. A lot of stuff happens between the time you hear about the news breaking on Fox News or OAN or Newsmax or whatever saying, California is so crazy, they're doing this bill. And then by the time it gets all the way to September, many of these bills actually just die out. They don't have the votes. So Jonathan is back with us again. He's been our legislative roundup guy. He's also involved with Reopen Schools, Reopen California Schools, right? Is that the full name?
Yep.
We're going to talk about another breaking story this week. Very interesting what the California Teachers Association was doing. Oppo research on people who were trying to reopen schools, aka they were looking into what parents were. So we got a lot to talk about tonight, and as always, I have my trusty co-host Cynthia with me as well. And in the background is the other co-host Winnie. So if you hear any barking or snoring or stuff like that, that's her. But Jonathan, welcome back. How are you doing tonight?
Good. Thank you for having me. So it's busy time of year. We have 60 days now. We have an election. So I'm running for office for school board, and there's a lot of people in my area, at least, and I think across the state that are ramped up about the school board races. And so just working with those folks is keeping us busy.
Awesome. And Cynthia, how are you doing?
Doing great. Excited for this podcast. Glad to have Jonathan back. Very excited to see his candidacy for his school board race. I agree with him 100%. I think it's the year of the parents and it's the year families take back the education system.
Awesome. So I guess we'll start off with the legislative roundup. Were there any general thoughts? Let's just start there. Let's just do the bird's eye view of general thoughts going into this legislative session, where we kind of ended up from the first time we did a legislative roundup to now. Because I remember the first time we kind of talked about this, we really focused in on like the vaccine groups and like that group of bills that vaccine working group was really pushing. Any general thoughts so far on what kind of transpired this legislative session?
So the vaccine, as you mentioned, a lot of the bills we talked about last time on the vaccine work group were high focus, just because they were pretty outrageous. The good news is many of those bills died by the time we got to the end of the session. There's a few that went through and in that process maybe got watered down a little bit. And the vaccine work group bills were dubbed, I think, the biggest losers by some of the politicos here in Sacramento when they looked at these different packages, just with how bad that did. So it took a lot of work, though, amongst a lot of people fighting these bills. It's really frustrating. We're spending so much time fighting these bills that we don't even have an opportunity sometimes to fight for bills that would help make it a difference in California. Just because things are pretty outrageous here, but it's the nature of how where we are being in California, and that I would say that's kind of my summary.
So one of the most popular, I would say, is like SB 866 was probably the most controversial, and that died, or I shouldn't say died. Senator Weiner, one of our favorite senators, pulled that bill at the last minute because I don't think he had the votes. He was seen pictures him running around the assembly trying to get as many votes as possible in support. In the end, he didn't have enough support for it, so he ended up pulling it.
SB 866 was of the ones that were remaining by the time we got to the end of the session, was the most controversial left in that. I would say SB, I think it was 871. That one died pretty early. It was clear it wasn't getting any support. Multiple legislators came out against 871 early. And so there was a statement, I want to say, very early on, that one died. But 866 went through committee on both chambers. It passed the Senate. So it was supposed to go to the floor of the Assembly. And we didn't think it had the votes. I was hearing it didn't have the votes. They amended it to say, firstly, 866 was a bill that would have allowed teens, originally as young as 12, to get any vaccine without parental consent. And it was touted that the COVID vaccine, right, which isn't authorized yet, so emergency use authorization would be allowed. But I think there's some gray area there, but that's how it was touted. And at the time, right, there's the way that the COVID vaccine was being administered, it wasn't like a lot of other vaccines where you might get them at your pediatrician's office where you're consulting with your pediatrician. I mean, they're going to schools and they're having clinics, and nursing students, brand new nursing students, are able to do this. I mean, we hear stories about kids who maybe have certain exemptions already because of their health conditions being offered bribes at school with pizza and being told forge parent signatures. So there's a very, there's a lot of nervousness around that, and also just the general parental rights issues. Like, hey, if we're going to be going down this route, like, what other things are we going to just say? Hey, not only are we going to give 12-year-olds the ability to make consequential medical decisions, but we're also in a situation where, because it's medical, we have to keep it from it's kept from the parents. And so there's a lot of concerns about parental rights. And even though he amended it and got it to move to age 15 and up, it still didn't have the votes in the assembly, and it never came up for a floor vote, and it died. Weiner was blaming, MAGA Republicans and anti-vaxxers, and called out some harassment that was done to his office, which I do not agree with. I don't believe you should be, being threatened with physical violence over this stuff. But he should be threatened to be kicked out of office. I don't think that will happen with him and where he's at, unfortunately. But yeah, so that's. But really, it was just parents up in arms in all different groups fighting. There really wasn't a special interest funding this. It was just, I would say, the most grassroots. All these different nonprofits that really didn't have the funding that were fighting this, and they, in the end, they prevailed.
And then what was SB 871?
That was the SB 871 was the one that would require a COVID vaccine in order to go to school.
And that one died too.
That one died early on. Yeah, that one clearly didn't have the votes. Yep.
So how many of the vaccine? I'm looking at this article right now. Would you say the vaccine group was successful this session, or not as successful as their ambitions set out to be?
Not as successful. Like I said, they were dubbed the biggest losers this legislative session because so many of the bills didn't make it, and of the ones that did make it, they were the least controversial ones, or they're temporary. So for example, I think 1479, that's the COVID testing bill that would require schools have a COVID testing plan in place, but it's not. It doesn't. It was watered down to the extent that it doesn't require testing as much. It was very clear that it doesn't require testing unless CDPH were to come in and say that you have to test, but they're not going to, because the budget. One of the contingencies is that there's a budget for it. The federal government funds run out. The state budget is limited in this budget cycle. It now has an end date of 3 years, so it doesn't go on indefinitely. And really, it's just a little bit of an administrative annoyance, to have this testing plan, which will probably be something similar to what it is now, which is we have free antigen tests for people who have symptoms and they want to take one. I mean, that's probably the extent of what it's going to be. So it's going to be a reminder for the next 3 years, but not anything as worrisome as we thought it might have been going in. So that was probably the next one that's kind of controversial that went through. There's a few other ones I think that we are on our agenda to talk about. Ones that relate to privacy, making it easier for schools to go in and without even your consent or medical providers to go in and put your child's information into an online database, and you're automatically opted into it. You can't. You'd have to go in the process and opt out. There's concerns that even after you opt out, is your information really removed from that system? So huge privacy concerns there for your kids and their medical history. But yeah, so but by and large, they're the least controversial ones made it, and the most controversial ones that we were hearing about didn't make it. And the kind of the stuff you talked about where California gets a lot of bad press for. And luckily we did get bad press for it. I think that did help in defeating these bills.
It's always interesting to see how these bills get introduced by, well, senators. I mean, Pan is termed out, so he was sort of, I feel like, the sacrificial lamb on this, to just kind of put his name on everything and author everything and figure I'm just going out with a bang anyway. Also, he's got other ambitions, but you have a lot of these senators like Senator Pan, Senator Weiner, who push these radical bills, and they sound really bad in the press. And people say, oh my gosh, California is trying to pass this bill. And then you're almost pleasantly surprised when it comes up to the end of the legislative session, and then they don't have the votes, and you go, huh, maybe sanity did prevail on some of these. Maybe it was politics. Maybe some people were getting, and rightfully so, SB 866. I have, if I had a nickel for every time a parent sent me something about SB 866, I could buy myself a nice In-N-Out burger. But there's a lot of people who are really concerned with bills like that. And I think there was a lot of outside pressure, and maybe moderate Democrats kind of said it's not really worth it for me. I'm just going to stay away from these bills like that. Do you think we always think of like the Democrats as one voting block, but you get to really see that it's not that way. There are different sections in moderate Democrats, correct?
Yes, and different interest groups, right, that push it. From what I hear, I don't think Pan is as liked in the assembly side, and I think a lot of people were frustrated that he was pushing these controversial bills through and forcing some of these legislators to have to make public decisions in some cases where they're running for other office, whether it's supervisor or whether it's maybe they continue to have to run for assembly, and it just wasn't popular. And I can tell you, these offices of these legislators, they were blowing up over some of these bills, and they're probably like saying, "Pan, why do you have to do this?" Right?
Mm-hmm.
Our entire office is swamped with these calls because of your bills. Right? They don't call us over anything else. They call us over your bills, and I don't think they liked them very much for that. And so to that end, and to the credit of everyone calling in, I think they did take those moderate positions and kind of break with some of these more radical bills that we saw coming from Pan. We had a couple of representatives even go out publicly on Twitter. There's a little bit of a spat between O'Donnell and Weiner even. After Weiner said, put out a statement that he says we almost had the votes, and basically said we almost had the votes. O'Donnell quote tweeted him and said, "Believe me, it wasn't even close."
Wow.
Yeah, so that was quite entertaining to see.
Yeah. So AB 2098, that was another controversial bill. That's headed to Newsom's desk, isn't it? That's the one regarding doctors and the medical board. And if they're not, I don't know, the way they say it is if they're not, the actual term is if they don't speak on what the scientific consensus is, they could be brought up against the boards and may lose their license.
Yeah, that one was very interesting too, and that one's pretty controversial as well. Although it's relating to just doctors' medical licenses. So if a doctor tells their patient, "Hey, I see that you're a 17-year-old male. I don't recommend getting the second dose of the COVID vaccine, for example," or they say something usual, cloth masks are not effective. If you want them to be effective, you have to wear a fitted N95 mask. Because you have facial hairs, it's not going to work. So you got to have to shave your facial hair, right? That goes against, the quote standard of care and the general consensus, which is coming from, government run and oftentimes partisans running these state health departments, that you can then be disciplined by the medical board up to losing your license. And what we've seen is that, things that were standard, COVID truths, a year later were complete opposite. But yet someone could have been disciplined, lost their license before that information comes out. And you'll have people afraid to speak up, at least in California, to tell their patients that. And so it's very disheartening and scary to see that they're going to try to legislate so detailed over those conversations. Prior to some of the amendments, it wasn't necessarily as bad, or it was more gray. Maybe that's why they wanted to clear it. It basically said gross negligence. So, that might be like telling your patients to go get some leeches to cure your COVID, right? That would be an example of maybe some gross negligence that could cause harm. But if you're, generally trying to help your patients and you do something maybe that's experimental or that's new or that you have a different opinion, then you might have been okay and spared under that old language. Now, if it's not the mainstream, you could be disciplined.
Well, there was that story of those two doctors here in California who came out and they got enormous press because they came out and said, look, we've treated X. And I forget what specifically they said, which drug. And I don't want to get in trouble with YouTube for whatever drug it was. But let's just say it was one of the drugs that they were definitely saying, do not take. It's not helpful at all. And they were saying, no, we're actually seeing like a good amount of recovery. And even them just speaking out about that, they would have been disciplined. They probably would have lost their license by now under AB 2098. I don't know if it's retroactive. Maybe they go back and say they punish these doctors for speaking out, but they had so much press that they were kicked off all social media and they were basically like shunned from the public light because no one wanted to talk about them. But that's a perfect example of doctors who were talking out against the narrative or what the mainstream was and would be prime targets for losing their license or being brought up on disciplinary charges in front of the medical board in California.
Yeah, that's right. And the way the bill is now is, I guess, publicly speaking, wouldn't have to be a patient of yours. But just like they were targeted on social media, you know that they're going to be targeted. So as soon as you make a statement publicly, they're going to go try to see if you have said anything to your patients at all. And they're still going to probably issue complaints against you. And even if you ultimately don't lose your license from something like this or even discipline, just going through that process is annoying and cumbersome and costly. And so, yeah, it is going to stifle free speech and stifle scientific debate on this issue. And just like any issue, it's important to have healthy disagreements over either it's medicine, health policy, science, what have you. We need to have those debates.
And I think it's also important too, like it's science. So when you find out new information, you're supposed to change your stance on it.
Yeah. Right. And not be so ideological about it. Evidence-based, you use research, talk to each other, disagree with each other on this stuff, not censor and cancel.
Yeah. Like the way to combat these kinds of discussions is with free speech, and this bill pretty much would trifle that. It would cause a chilling effect.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, it'd be like going back into like the Middle Ages, and then if a doctor said, I don't think we should be bloodletting with leeches, and the scientific community said, well, that's not the mainstream. We love bloodletting with leeches, and therefore you're not allowed to practice anymore. It sounds ridiculous, but that's exactly what it would be. It'd be like whatever the mainstream is now, 10 years from now, we could look back and go, man, we really pushed that? Like, that's insane. But that's what California is looking to do right now, is keep people in line and push the narrative.
I love that. I love that example. Just like smoking pregnant women, 70 years ago.
Yeah, it's like in Forrest Gump when the doctor rolls in and he's got a cigarette hanging out of his mouth, and they don't see anything wrong with the fact that a doctor's smoking in front of you, and nobody saw anything wrong with smoking. Any others of the vaccine working group that you can think of that either passed or failed before we move on to some other of these highlighted bills?
I don't know, Cynthia, do you have I think you had a couple on your list that you wanted to talk about. I think it was maybe 1419 and 1797.
Let me double check here.
We may have actually talked about some of those ones. I believe 1797 is the bill that changes some of the privacy standards.
Yeah, and I think it might have died too.
I think 1797 went through. But we're pulling up. We're finding out.
Well, while we're waiting on the consensus, in a little bit, we are going to talk about this CTA spying on parents if you are listening. Also, if you're tuning in for the first time and you've never tuned into California Underground, this is what we like to do on Thursday nights. We usually have a guest on. We get really blessed with our guests who come on. Jonathan's great. We have a lot of great guests. So always tune in. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, review. All that hubbub, all that stuff that you hear every single influencer, everybody saying, smash that like button, comment for the algorithm, send it to your mom who loves political stuff. Send it to your grandparents who love political stuff. Send them a card as well. They might miss you, and they might want to hear from you after a while. So, just think of them. So, anyway.
1797 did pass, but it hasn't been sent to Newsom's desk yet. So, I know that there's petitions trying to get him to veto that bill, just like there are on 2098, 1479. They're trying to get him to veto that bill. And I think was it SB 1479? Was that the last one, Cynthia?
Yeah. SB. So while I looked that up, a question. So while I looked that up, Jonathan, do you think in general, because they're speaking of vetoes for Newsom, there was some bills where I guess Sanity won. So like for example, he did veto that like open drug site bill. Mm-hmm. And I actually met with James Gallagher today. He did like a policy roundtable for the Lincoln Club in San Diego. So I actually asked him that same question. Like, were you surprised by some of these bills that Newsom vetoed? Or what are your thoughts on that?
As we know, despite Newsom's claims, he plans on running for president. So I think, I'm not too surprised, because imagine him signing that into law or letting it become into law. You could imagine the campaign commercials right now. I would imagine 2098 AB 2098 is similar, maybe not as controversial in that regard, but that it's going to be used against him in a commercial if he runs for president. So especially if there is a doctor that is disciplined for some of this stuff that, up until the 2024 elections. So I'm hopeful in 2098. I'm not optimistic, not overly optimistic, but I think there's a decent chance he could on that one. 1479, I think he's going to sign that one or just let it go into law. No, it's not as bad anymore. And he has a little bit more control over the policy on that one, because he's not going to let CDPH mandate testing at schools. So then we won't have to be dealing with that. But yeah, I think 2098. I think 1797, he's going to probably let that pass. I don't think he's going to veto that one. There's just not.
I've said this yesterday. Was the silver lining to Gavin Newsom running is that he might actually moderate a lot of his positions.
Yeah,
coming up 100%. Over the next 2 or 6 years, is he's going to veto a lot of bills that are very crazy. So he's going to make an enemy out of Scott Wiener, because Scott Wiener is going to be very upset with a lot of the radical bills he tries to get passed and keep getting vetoed by Newsom. But I think that's one of the silver linings. I know it's politics, but hey, I'll take it. I'll take a moderate Newsom who's not trying to push every single radical agenda through.
Well, I guess lesson for us is, we should always have a California governor running for president every time. And
we should be hoping that whoever gets in will be like, well, I hope they want to run for president, because if they do, sooner or later, they're going to moderate their positions. They're not going to be crazy.
Yes, exactly.
Because the people in Iowa don't want to hear crazy stuff, and they don't want open drug use sites and all that stuff. So definitely not going to work out. Did you find that bill, Cynthia, or do you want me to hop on one of mine that
You can hop on one of yours.
Yeah. Well, I brought this up with the last one because it was gutted and amended at the last minute after the Bruin decision. And we were kind of waiting up until the last minute to hear. And I was checking my Twitter until the end of the session. And SB 918 is dead for the session, which was effectively. So if I can try and parse out what happened here, the Supreme Court ruled on Bruin. And Bruin basically said you don't need good cause for carry and conceal anymore. The current law as written requires that if you're going to get a carry and conceal in California, you need to pass a test that requires good cause. So currently the law on the books, which could create a whole fiasco with a lot of issues, is unconstitutional as written. So therefore it's void because it's unconstitutional. So they had to write a new bill that would replace this law and be in line with Bruin. So it was in line with Bruin, but they added about 100 places that you could not carry and conceal in the state of California. And they included, obviously, you couldn't go in churches, you couldn't go schools were already part of it, but the big thing was private businesses couldn't go into any more private businesses unless they put a sign on the door that said guns and carry are welcome, which good luck in California for anybody who wants to put that on their front door. And the worst part is you can't be on the sidewalks or the parking lots adjacent to any of these sensitive places, meaning that you could basically carry your gun in your driveway to your car and then leave it in your car wherever you go. You wouldn't be able to carry it anywhere. Thankfully, it died. I don't know if they're going to try again. I feel like a lot of times these bills get a lot of political momentum because of what's going on, because of the Bruin decision. But they're going to have to, one way or another, they're going to have to fix the law as it is. So there'll probably be another shot at it. I don't know if it'll be as radical. We'll see. But until then, for all those carry and conceal holders out there like myself, we get to enjoy more places to carry and conceal. We don't have to worry about that for several more months until they introduce more things. So I'm happy SB 918 is dead.
Yeah, no, it was quite surprising. And I don't know all the politics behind that one. I do know there was concern over that it would be challenged immediately and they would lose immediately. And then maybe that's part of it, right? It would just look bad that they would create this law that would immediately be overturned by a judge because it was just so, in some ways, it was almost worse than the existing law that was on the books. You know, I would, you know, the part I think it says it shall, there's a shall in there. So in some counties where I'm at in Placer County, it's much easier to get a concealed carry permit. But, you know, in San Francisco, there's like a dozen permits issued. That's all they have.
Yeah, it's not that many.
Right? Yeah, it's a ridiculous number. And so now they have to. Bonta even put out a statement that says you have to basically let people get concealed carry in these counties. And I think, 19 was trying to fix that before. And I think they even had an urgency clause. That's part of the problem. That's what I heard, that it had an urgency clause to get it to go in effect immediately to stop, I think, maybe some of these concealed carry permits from happening. And because they have that urgency clause, they needed to get, was it 2/3, right, of the votes?
Yeah.
That caused the whole bill to fail. They easily had enough votes to overturn, just to make it go in effect January 1st. So if they would have not been greedy and not have put in the urgency clause, they could have easily passed this thing and it would have been the law January 1st. Now, between now and January 1st, there would have been a lot of people trying to get their concealed carry permits. But up until that, and they probably do some sort of delay to have that happen. Now they have to wait till next legislative session. It probably could pass, but it's going to be January 1st of 2024 before that would take effect.
Yeah. So and as I tell everybody, go out and get them because you have this law on the books that is technically unconstitutional and they're shall issue. So go out and get those CCWs. And I agree. I think the law, even if it passed as is, if they just hit copy and just submitted the same exact bill, I think it would ultimately get overturned in court. It would get slapped down pretty quickly. I would venture to say even in the Ninth Circuit, it might actually get slapped down because it's so in direct conflict with the Supreme Court decision. Which actually, on a separate note, they did a three-panel judge. Why does that sound weird? A panel of 3 judges on the Ninth Circuit did just overturn the 21 and under rifle ban here in California. So you're going to start seeing a lot of these Second Amendment cases and Second Amendment issues in California, I think, start to fall under the Bruin decision. But that's a whole different episode. But SB 918, it's dead for the session. Enjoy it. Go out and get those CCWs. Cynthia?
Yeah, so I did just kind of like a quick search on all the other ones because what I did was I looked at our last legislative roundup. But yeah, I think the EB 2098 that probably will get signed into law by Newsom. EB 1797, they'll probably get signed. SB 866, that was a win for parents. And then, I think the other ones, like they either didn't have the votes in committees or at the end of the session when they were trying to rush through those bills, they didn't really make it to the floor in the end. So I thought we could transition to the two that Jonathan specifically wanted to go over. One of them was SB 913, and that had something to do with Los Angeles Unified School District. Jonathan, if you wanted to take over that.
Let's talk about this one. So California Ed Code spells out how much school board members can get paid a month. And if you're a really small district, I want to say, I don't know exactly what this is amount, but it's not very much, like $40 a month or something. And the maximum that you can get paid is $2,000 a month. And the way that they determine this, it's a schedule based off enrollment. So if you have originally it was more than 400,000 students in your district, then you can get paid $2,000 a month. Right? That's what San Diego Unified gets paid. So I think that's about $18,000 a year, or maybe it's 2,000. Yeah, I think it's or 24,000 is what it would be. The next level is San Diego Unified, and they get paid 18,000, so 1,500 a month. Where I'm at, the school district has a little over 10,000, so they can get paid $400 a month. There were some clauses in there that allows you to raise it 5% every year, but the board would have to, make that decision. Now, this was on the books since 1979, at least. It may have been there prior. So those dollars today are worth, those amounts, if they were being adjusted for inflation, would be over 4 times the amount that they are. So that'd still be quite a bit, right? But a lot of school boards don't want to do that. They try to look at it as a completely voluntary position and almost like you're lucky if you get anything. But in LAUSD, they were getting paid, I want to say like $40,000 up until 2017. And then they put this compensation committee through the city, and they said, you know what, actually, we think the board member should get paid $125,000 a year. On top of that, they have their own staff, right? I mean, the budget's huge for the board. And so they've been getting paid $125,000 a year if they don't have any other jobs, which is a complete violation of Ed Code. And they've been doing that for years. And I've been kind of hammering this as I kind of identify this, because I think some of these other board positions in these smaller or medium-sized districts are too small. You're not getting enough, candidates and parents wanting to say, I'll do this. I'll go through the trouble to sacrifice, 10 hours a week or 15 hours a week to do this, because, you might get, in some cases, you might get paid $40 a month for something like that. And parents are busy. We have, obligations of our own. And so I think you need to fairly compensate to have qualified individuals run for some of these offices. But anyway, I had been hammering this, but LAUSD was seeing a problem. One is I think they potentially could be sued. And then 2, their enrollment was declining below 400,000. They think by next year, they'll be under 400,000 students. So they get Hertzberg to write a bill. I guess LAUSD wrote the bill. They sponsored it, and Hertzberg introduced it. That does a couple of things. It keeps a bunch of other exemptions that LAUSD had, but it lowers that 400,000 threshold down to 250 for a lot of these exemptions. And it writes a brand new exemption. So instead of that schedule that I just talked about of how school board members get paid, if a school board has more than 250,000 students, then they can get paid via an alternative method if it's done through some sort of, if it's recommended through the city or county, which is what LA did. So basically, LAUSD wrote this bill to say, what we did is now going to be legal going forward, even though they violated the law for the last 5-6 years. It's going to be legal going forward. And they picked a number, 250,000, that only applies to them and applies to them for quite some time, where San Diego Unified, I want to say, is 80,000 students. So this bill was specifically targeted towards LAUSD, written by LAUSD, giving them exemptions and allowing them to get paid $125,000 a year when the next closest pay schedule for a school board member is $18,000 a year. So Anyway, it's something I think is kind of crazy. It didn't have much opposition. It kind of passed all the way through all these committees. It was just seemed as like a fixing bill that was needed because LAUSD's enrollment was declining. That's how it was sold. So it just easily passed. And it wasn't until I was researching other bills that came up. I'm like, whoa, all this thing I've been harping about now is going to change Ed Code. But it just shows you just, I don't want to say corruption and just ridiculousness of these bills in California. and how they're targeted towards special interest groups.
Well, special interest groups have a lot to say with a lot of these bills, so that's not,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to education. You know that firsthand.
Yes.
Okay, what's next on the list we got?
Yeah, just real quick. AB 20 was it 2554 or 84?
It was just going through all our text messages. It is AB 2584.
84, yes. Okay, yes. So that one was a bill that was introduced by the California School Board Association because they thought it was too easy to recall school board members, right? So they write this bill that really effectively does nothing. And then they tout it as a win for protecting school board members from being recalled. And one of the key aspects in this bill was it raised the initial signatures for the notice of intention. So if you're trying to recall someone, you have to get certain citizens in the community to sign that says we want to recall this person because they did these bad things. And then they have to submit it. They got to post it publicly, I think in the newspaper for 30, and it has to be out there for 30 days or something like that. So it used to be, 10 to 20 signatures, depending on the size of the jurisdiction with state law. They got that to be raised, I think, to 30 to 50 signatures. I may be off on some of those numbers, but 50 was the max, right? I don't think it's still that hard to get 50 signatures of a notice of intention. But that's what they were saying. This is going to make it more difficult for school board members to get recalled, which is absurd because the limits of getting someone recalled are still in place. So you still have to have anywhere, I think, from 30 to 15% of registered voters in your district to recall someone. So, if you're in a small district, I think it's 30%. And if you're in a larger district, it's 15%. So it still is going to take, in many cases, thousands, if not tens of thousands of voters to sign these petitions to get these school board members recalled. And maybe in cases like LAUSD, you might even need to have over 100,000 people sign these recall petitions. And so it didn't really do anything in that regard. And there's one area they could have fixed, which they chose not to. And that is if someone gets appointed, say there's a vacancy on a school board. If somebody gets appointed, then they within 30 days or so, you can get just, in many cases, 200 signatures and get that person kicked off and then force the school district to have a special election, which could cost them tens of thousands of dollars. They didn't address that loophole that only applies to school board appointments. Doesn't apply to any other appointment. We can't do that if the legislature, on any kind of appointments that Newsom does, whether it's a Senate appointment, whether it was any kind of other vacancy that we have, just requires a small percent, like 2%. No, only for school boards does this happen. It doesn't happen for city councils, doesn't happen for county supervisors, just school boards. They decided not to fix that one. That caused a special election down in San Diego. Actually, it was San Diego, I believe it was. Ty Humes was a school board member that was appointed. And teachers union, which may be a good segue to the next one, the local teachers union there, San Diego, which happens to be the situation that we're at now, they went around and easily collected, I think it was like 200 signatures from the community and got him recalled and forced them to have a special election, costing the district tens of thousands of dollars. Anyway, it's just kind of another thing, the CSBA not really understanding or either misrepresenting what they actually did. They didn't really fix anything and pretending like they did.
This wasn't sort of in reaction to or response to those San Francisco school board members being recalled, was it?
Excuse me there. It kind of was, right? And that took a lot of effort. It did get done. It was good. Those school board members needed to get recalled, but it wasn't easy. And so CSBA writes this bill and acts like they made it harder for someone to get recalled, and it does absolutely nothing in that regard for them to get recalled. It's still just as easy if someone's appointed, and it's still just as easy to get, or just as hard, I guess, to get the number of required signatures for an elected school board member. But yeah, it was in response to, I think, not just there, but there was a small district that they were able to recall some school board members. Because if you do have it, if someone dumps money from outside in some of these small school districts, you probably could do it, because if you only have 1,000 voters there, right, you might have, that's only 300 signatures. It might be a lot for the community, but it'd be easy for some outsider to write a check to get 300 signatures.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned teachers union as a good segue. Was that a segue to your next bill or the next story?
Oh, I don't know if we want the CTA spying on parents. If we wanted to talk about it. We can talk about the stuff first.
The one bill I wanted to talk about, and going back to Newsom's push to become more of a moderate for the presidential election, though he says he's not going to, was at Senate Bill 1338, which was to create his care court proposal, which was probably controversial. I would say it absolutely is controversial to a lot of civil rights advocates, was this idea that they are going to bring back forced, court ordered, whatever you want to call it, mental treatment for the homeless. And the bill, as I understand it, basically gives you a choice, which is you can be criminally convicted or you can go to this mandatory treatment. And that's one of their ways that they want to help clean up California, is this care court. Michael Schellenberger says it's a knockoff of what he did, but worse. Of course he did. But I think it's interesting that he is doing something that actually is more stick than carrot in California, that seems to love more carrot for those who commit crimes and those who are getting in trouble. And for him to kind of put this hard line of, well, you either have to get treatment or you're going to go to jail, because you can't be out there and can't be doing all these crazy things. So I'll be interested to see where this goes, if it does have an actual effect. I don't think we're going to be going back to like the little white vans and the guys in the straitjackets kind of rounding people up, but it's people are going to fight this and people are not going to be happy about it, and we'll see where it goes and see if it's a success or if it's just pandering for the election to try and clean up the state.
Yeah, I don't know too much about the details of that bill. My understanding is it passed unanimously, did it not, in the legislature?
Let's see. It doesn't say what the vote total was, but
Okay.
yeah, it's on its way to his desk. So,
got it. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Again, like without the details, what I heard is that maybe some people worried it didn't go far enough. Right, California has been moving this direction of removing those sticks, right, of being able to tell people that need help, right, that to be able to give them that help and force them to get that help, because they're removing, you can't they could be camping out and doing drugs in front of a school almost, and your law enforcement's restricted from doing anything about it because of the way the laws are written. So hopefully this brings us back in the right direction. In that regard, so we can have people get that help that they need, and really provide that stick in order to make sure that they will decide to do that and get them on the right track. But yeah, it's yet to be seen how effective it will be, and if we need to go even more in that direction, if more details need to come out from it. But it's definitely an issue that he needs to address, because it's just getting incredibly bad in California, and the policies before were let's not do anything to actually help homeless, but we'll continue to give money to this homeless industrial complex. So these people is making money off of the issue, as opposed to fixing the issue.
I mean, I would just like to not have to go take my dog for her morning walk and see a homeless person drop trow in a public park and take a dump. But, that may be asking too much in California. So we'll see what happens.
What was that story of the meth poop I saw going around on social media?
Oh my God. That dogs were getting sick because they were eating the poop of homeless people, and it had meth residue in it.
I think Wiener even tweeted about that being so, like stop it, stop spreading false news or something.
Yeah, he's always fast if there's bad news about San Francisco. He's like, stop spreading it. It's bad. It's fake news. It's just all you like right wingers. He always blames like right wingers, and it's like, how many right wingers do you think are in California that are actually doing this? They make it sound like Like they're everywhere, but they're not. I don't know.
Yeah, they always tell that they're the majority, right? And then when something bad happens, they're like, "Oh, it's the Republicans. It's their fault," even though we're outnumbered. I don't know. Like, and if any of the viewers are on TikTok, you should follow Scott Wiener on TikTok. It's a pretty phenomenal. I know.
Did you send
I
me
took
the
Phil down.
video of him today? Did you send me the video of him doing that walk? Of him,
Yeah.
like his sassy walk that he was doing or something?
I didn't send that video, but I was, or actually no, I did. The one that the one where he's walking in high heels.
Well, was he in high heels? I just saw him holding glasses and doing like a sassy walk down some steps. as if,
Okay,
like,
maybe that was
when right wingers are like attacking you and he's like,
oh yeah, and they're jealous. No, that was a TikTok he posted today or recently. But I know that I was the one that sent you like the first video he posted. And so Jonathan, I don't know if you're on TikTok, but he literally it's a video of him walking on the sidewalk with a friend with a bike, and he's wearing high heels, and he's like, sorry, we're gonna go on a rabbit hole.
I'm not on TikTok, and you're reinforcing good reasons why I'm not on TikTok.
COVID changed my mind about TikTok. All I get are dog videos and cooking videos. That's basically all I get. I don't get the twerking or anything like that. I don't get any of the dances.
You don't get
any of the thirst traps.
You don't get wiener in high heels.
Unless you're 6'7" and have walked downhill in 4-inch heels, you're not allowed to comment. And it's literally
actually him walking down.
Yeah, it's him walking. I remember I texted you that, and then you like threw up, and then I think you followed him after that. But it's too good, too good.
Scott Wiener. He'll provide at least how many more years of entertainment and content. All right. Any more bills? Or do we want to hop on to the next topic? That Jonathan was at the middle of big breaking news this week that I thought was really fascinating. Sharon McKeenan of Let Them Breathe actually shared it with me. That was the first I heard of it. So Jonathan, do you want to let us know what happened this week? And tell us all about, spill the beans. What happened this week? What's the scandal?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So let's go back to April of, spring of 2021. What was happening? Schools were just beginning to open up. And it was because of the efforts of parents down in San Diego. There was in the North County there. They sued their school district. They sued Governor Newsom over the rules, some of the arbitrary COVID rules, because their schools weren't opening, and they couldn't open full time. And so part of it was the state, some of it was their local school districts refusing to open. And we have a situation here at San Diego, which is the same school district I mentioned earlier, where they recalled that school board member over just 200 signatures that was appointed. So in that school district, they like you said, they had to sue their school district there, and they won. And so the CTA, let's take a step back. Sorry, that same union sued in December to keep their school district closed. The school district, because of parents, were going to open in January, and the school district was like, "Oh, no," or the teachers union were like, "No, we can't do this," and they sued. CTA helped them out, and they sued to keep schools closed for another 3 months. So then parents sued, won, right? They got schools open. Well, there's this weird. There is this in the CTA in particular. They believe that all these parents that were coming together to fight for their kids to have an in-person education, it was due to some sort of conspiracy, that there's some right-wing dark money out there coming in and funding these groups, they're dark groups, and they're taking all this lawsuit. So the CTA, which we find out through these emails, was researching various parent groups. And in this email, this is an email from Ann Swinburne, a researcher for CTA, sent an email. She got the information because of connections that were made through this lawsuit earlier at San Diego from the CTA lawyer. And he knows that there's these other parents that have dirt on other parents, which, let me go tangential here. The way that some of the CTA operates and some of these other local unions that are involved with CTA is they have these parent groups that are aligned with them. So anytime that there's an issue that the union wants to push, their CTA is pushing, they'll contact these groups that are maybe they're part of PTA or they're just involved in the politics of everything that goes on there. And then they have that way they have a parent voice that can represent one side of it that represents their views. So we see how they operate. They have large funds, different networks, and so it's just projection onto these other parent groups. So, well, if they were doing this, because we do these things, they must be doing this. And they sent this email saying, hey, we're researching all these different parent groups. And they mentioned Parent Association by name, and they were trying to figure information out about this group. And so a couple exchanges happen. They talk about what they're doing, why they're doing it, and then they someone accidentally CCs the principal. His name is Adam. One of these other parents' names was Adam. Gets mixed up in it and sends it to the principal. And then they start freaking out. They're like, do we need to do any damage control? And they're like, well, maybe you have a relationship with him. Can you ask him to delete it? So then they loop the principal back in and says, he's so busy. And she actually sends it directly to him. He's so busy, I think he will delete it. Right? Alluding that he's going to do it. Right? Well, now through a public records request, through something unrelated, this comes up. And as you can imagine, some of these parents were shocked. It was shared, I want to say like on Friday or Thursday of last week on a private Facebook group, at which then at that point it was shared with me. And I'm like, what? I think it was like on the weekend that I saw it. I'm like, this is what we've been thinking this whole time, that the CTA is spending their time doing is going after these parents. We see it in their comments. We see it on social media. And now we have evidence that the CTA was funding opposition research on parents that simply wanted to get their schools open. And so I knew it was going to be big. I wanted to make sure I got all the facts right. I got the information from the public records request. I redacted emails of everybody that wasn't a government official, because I didn't want, even though you could probably find it, I didn't want Twitter to flag me and take it down, as we saw today, I think, with Jay Bhattacharya on his post on some other criticism of a journalist. Right, that's beside the point. But I, did that, made sure I got all the facts right, posted it, and sure enough, it goes crazy, and national news picked it up. It was Fox, Federalist, Daily Caller, Daily Wire. I think the next day after Fox published it, or that same day Fox published it, it was just all like, not wall-to-wall coverage, but every hour Fox was picking it up and talking about it.
So, I mean, it's obvious. I feel like was this a shock that they were doing this, or do you feel like you knew all along that the CTA was doing stuff like this behind the curtain when it comes to opposition research or looking into parents, or were you kind of shocked that this was the level, how low they would go on this?
I was shocked we had it in writing, but I wasn't shocked that it was being done. We'd seen that the CTA and UTLA on the California Federation of Teachers side. So those are powerful state unions. It's not surprising at all. And I guess my message is that, this is how the money is being spent. It's not being spent on better policies for teachers, right? Is what you think it should be. One of the things that's being spent is researching your constituents, essentially, and spending money going after them, trying to dig dirt. And so it didn't surprise us because we've seen it. We saw the effect of it. We thought it was the case, and now we just see it in writing. It's around the same time in March of 21, something similar happened. So parents were rallying in LA to try to get schools to reopen, and people were quoted in the media. And so UTLA funded a researcher, a contractor, to try to find out more information on who these people were that were being quoted in the media. And their whole goal in that was to paint the people who wanted. This thesis was, if you wanted open schools, you're racist, you're white nationalist, and you're a bigot. That's kind of the message they're trying to sell. So they're trying to get research on who it was that was ultimately quoted here. They wanted to get the ethnicities and the financial background. Like, are you well off? Are you rich? Like, are you a rich white parent, or are you, maybe poor, or maybe you're, black or Latino. So they were trying to say, like, trying to paint this picture of rich white parents. So they went after this professor who was Middle Eastern, and that's ultimately how we got this information, was because this researcher kind of spelled out the goal of the research too clearly to this parent that was quoted. And so we saw evidence of it back then that UTLA was doing it, right? But we thought, well, that's just UTLA. We know UTLA is very radical. They were responsible for school closures. We have the teachers union president there. She was saying things like, well, I'm paraphrasing here, but babies may not have learned their ABCs, but at least they know the protest and coup. And just like we turn our kids into radicals. We're not teaching them actually, reading, writing, and arithmetic, but we're letting them be good radicals. And so we saw that there, but we didn't necessarily know for sure that CTA was doing it, which is larger. But sure enough, that's what your union does for any teachers that are listening. That's what you're funding. And so if you're upset with it, which I imagine you are, the way that you can do that is opt out of the CTA. You don't have to give them your money. A Supreme Court decision, Janice, I don't know who the other side of it, but Janice was the side petitioning, was able to win, and you can opt out of the union. You do not have to be part of it. And so you do not have to give your money to these political operatives who are spending it, on issues that you maybe don't care about or disagree with, and on opposition research on the parents of the families that you're there to serve.
Is that technically a dossier?
I mean, I guess you'd see if they have individual files. I know that the ones in LA probably were that case. They probably had files on them. We joke that some of us parents that have been active for a while, they probably have files on us as well. I'd like to see that, right? Can you give me my file? I'd like to know what's in it. And at the same time, I was getting threats online, like just crazy stuff. People assumed that I was funded by some dark money. They were doing these weird web, I don't know what they're called, but they would run like my social media into this sort of diagram, and it would show that like because of people who retweeted me, it was this weird thing, like it showed like all these webs, like a spider web of how I was connected to, and therefore that was like evidence that it was part of some right wing dark entity, and really I was just a front group. And she was constantly going on for months about how, she has the receipts and she's going to dig up and I'm going to be doomed when when she's done with me, and like all this nonsense. And I was just laughing that she must have had his biggest crush on me or something. So,
look, it's just because she probably wants to date you. So
exactly.
In
She
the words
just
of
wants to
AOC.
date me. And I don't remember her name, but if she ever watches this, I know you wanted to date me. So.
But unfortunately, you can't date her. So sorry.
No, sorry. I am a married man.
Yeah.
Sorry to disappoint you.
And
you have a cute little marshmallow.
I do. 3.5 months old.
So does anything come out of this, do you think, for the CTA, or is it just a blemish on their record, or do you think
they're not responding to media. They're not responding to media. Ann Swinburne, this researcher, which I'm now hearing because people are bringing it to my attention, is pretty radical. She's some pretty crazy stuff on social media. She locked all of her social media accounts, and then she later deleted her Twitter account. I'd love to be a fly in the wall for those conversations at CTA headquarters. But they're not going to respond. They're not going to put out a statement, right? Because they'll just draw more attention to this. But I think what it does do is it damages their reputation. And I'm hoping that teachers see this and say, this is the organization that I'm supporting with these union dues of almost $1,000 a year. Like, no, I'm done with this. I'm going to end my membership, and I'm going to not give my money to an organization that ultimately hurts our profession's reputation and hurts our families. So I think they'll probably do damage control. Maybe CTA will try to do some sort of fake parent outreach to make it seem like they're trying to fix their image. Who knows? Maybe they'll actually do real outreach. Who knows? But we'll see. I think at this point it's probably just going to be a pretty big knock and a pretty big blemish.
So if anything else, it's more of a Pyrrhic victory of we were proven right. We knew that they were doing dirty stuff on us. Just throw it on the pile of stuff that people who were called fringe extremists for 2 years are now being proven right on. It's just the pile keeps getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
So that's basically where we're at, is that we knew the CTA was working behind the scenes, and they were spying or doing oppo research on people to figure out what's going on and who was funding them.
Yeah. And education is big in the news cycle right now. We just saw the test scores, and there's this weird part where people are now recognizing how bad the school closures were, and now you have the very same people that were either advocating for schools to close or censoring people who are trying to get schools to open, coming out and saying, recognizing this, and then trying to blame Trump for some reason on this, or trying to blame Republicans, right? Even though it was people like Trump in July of 2020 said schools should open, and that's really all you needed to do. We knew it was safe at that time, but somehow they're trying to blame him for that. In many ways, maybe he is to blame, because a lot of people in these blue areas had Trump derangement syndrome, and so the moment that Trump took that position, they had to take the opposite position and keep schools closed. But we saw DeSantis open schools up in Florida. We just fine. In other red states, they were doing just fine. There are some blue cities within red states that weren't, but overall the states were fine. And but not here in California. And we now have some sort of revisionism going on, where they're acting like it was the prior administration that did it, and it was us the Democrats speaking here. It was us Democrats that got schools open, and trying to blame Trump and the Republicans. It's pretty sad, and I don't think anyone's buying it. But of course, we're going into an election year, and the polling must show how bad this issue is, and they have to try to change history.
That's
so
some
speaking
pretty
of
gaslighting.
Yeah. So speaking of elections, because we are coming up on the hour, as you mentioned earlier, you announced your candidacy to run for school board. So since we're on this topic of like gaslighting, well, it's on Twitter. People follow you. Do you have any update about what's going on with the Sacramento Bee? And then maybe give a background to the audience too. Like,
Yeah.
I thought you were going to kind of lead into that, Cynthia. I thought you were going to say, well, we know you've announced your candidacy, and speaking of gaslighting, how's your candidacy going?
Yeah, like where are you going with this?
Jonathan, how's it going over there with the gaslighting?
No. Yeah, so for those who don't know, the SAC Bee, and sorry, I have the dogs here barking in the background. 1 second here. So, so the SAC Bee is there's SAC Bee and there's the SAC Bee editorial board. So I want to make sure this is distinguished, because I don't want to just, people do disagree with the SAC Bee in general. I don't want to put the SAC Bee journalists in this category. But we have the SAC Bee editorial board that has attacked our politicians here in Placer County, gone after school board members, gone after Placer County supervisors, gone after business owners that took a position that, hey, we should be open. Target them, writing nasty things about them, false things about them. And then after this editorial board, this one journalist in particular, does this, she then blocks them on Twitter. She's blocked Reopen California Schools on Twitter, right? So the SAC Bee editorial board has refused to even consider an endorsement or have an endorsement meeting for the most consequential education office race, the state superintendent of public instruction. They're not doing that. They're not doing any other school board races in our area, and we have dozens of school board races, and some of which are much larger than the school district that I'm running in. But no, there's 2 districts that they want to have endorsement meetings for. The district that I'm running, Roseville City School District, and Rockland Unified School District. Now, what do those 2 school districts have in common? Well, they either have they have 2 people running that have been the most vocal, one of the most vocal people about getting our schools to reopen. And that's it. That's what we have in common. She's not interested in the school districts next door that might have 4 times as many students. That has might be pretty consequential because they have expanded seats. No, just our races. And so I get an email from the same journalist that blocked me on Twitter inviting me to this endorsement meeting. I've now received an email from her boss, the editor for the editorial board. I need to get back to him. But I'm going to ask him a couple questions, like, why do you think this could be impartial if she's blocked people on Twitter and already has shown how she feels about some of the positions we've taken? Why are you only focused on our races and not even the state superintendent's race? So I'll just be asking a couple questions about that and see what he says before I make my ultimate decision. So, but yeah, it's just funny. Kevin Kiley has put out a Kevin Kiley, Joe Patterson up here, they refused to even participate just because of the attacks that this particular board and frankly they've become irrelevant. Everyone up here knows they're just even people on their side. I think recognize who they are and what they are. So, honestly, if I would have gotten an endorsement from them, I think people would be questioning. Some of my supporters might be questioning who I am and what I stand for. It is quite an interesting situation.
Mhm.
No, more political drama, and
Yeah.
It's I don't. But the gaslighting though, I think I'm keep going back to that and the gaslighting of Jonathan and his candidacy. But let's kind of shift real quick before we sign off, because I do want to give you a chance to talk about. Sorry. And I think there was a chain reaction between my dog barking and then setting off your dog's barking. So I think it was a big bark chain from one end of California to the other. But before we sign off, I want to sort of let people know what you're doing, which is running for school board, and maybe you can tell people why you're running, what your goal is. I mean, we've already just gone over what's wrong with education. There's a lot of stuff wrong with education in California. Test scores are down. You have the CTA who is spying on parents. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on. And tell us about your goals and why you want to make an impact through the school board, and why you're running.
Yeah, so obviously the very traditional things, right? We want good curriculum, we want safe schools, we want normalcy for our kids and our staff at schools. But I would say some of the extra pieces that maybe we don't get talked about as much, and which is a passion of mine, is how do we fight back on the state in many cases? How do we work together with other local jurisdictions, including other school boards, to come together to either speak at the Capitol against write resolutions against bills, fight these bills, because we can't, we continue to get handed these policies from the state that are so damaging and destructive, and or at least annoying to our school districts and our administrators and our teachers. So how do we work together to do that? So that's, I think, more of maybe an uncommon thing that I'd like to achieve. The other thing, which I just put out on my social media 2 days ago, I did put it out in advance, knowing this story was going to come, because I did just hear about it. But our teachers were great at reopening schools where I was at. They're not very well represented by the California Teachers Association. I would like to see our teachers disassociate from the California Teachers Association. They can save themselves $1,000 a year, and they can feel good about it by not sending their money to an organization that harm aspect of something that I'd like to change. And again, just going back to some curriculum issues, just want to make sure that again, class to fight, make sure we're following them, but we're not. But not going as radical as some of these other school districts or what the California Department of Education is doing. We could come together and we might actually be able to form something in a cost-effective way by working with these districts and working at the county level, or maybe across a couple different counties in our area. So those are some of the goals that I have. I was showing Cynthia earlier. I did get my walk piece today, right here. So just showing her. So it's pretty good. I got this is the back here. I got Kevin Kiley's endorsement, Heidi Hall's endorsement. Wonderful people, really appreciative for their support, and I'm looking forward to winning this race and having a seat on the school board.
You're kind of breaking up, and I was thinking like, oh, the CTA is spying on you.
CTA is. They're already breaking into the transmission.
That's right. They're on this connection, right? Probably.
Yeah.
Who knows? I hear in some races people have been followed, home and all this stuff because. Well, they want to find out, do you really live in the district? I think that'd be absurd at this point to think that I don't live in the district. But it's pretty insane that these very local date races, how much effort the CTA might put into fighting a candidate. And you're going to hear there's going to be some local news there in San Diego you might hear soon. There might be some news up here, but there's some active, same kind of politicking happening where they're deathly afraid. The CTA is deathly afraid that candidates like myself are going to get elected. Is what we're seeing, and it's showing through their actions, and hopefully their tactics actually bite themselves, because kick themselves, because it's gonna hurt them, I think, in the end when we see this come out.
Yeah, and like I say, always people want to figure out how they can make a difference, or they think it's too hard, or they're like, oh, I don't know what to do. I'm like, they always need someone on school board, and I think school board's one of those positions that people kind of gloss over. They think it's not that big of a deal. It's a big deal after 2 years, and you saw what happened in California with schools being closed and your kids' education suffering, and it's a huge impact on your life and your kids' life.
Nope. Yep. And even if you don't have kids, property values, it can impact your property values if you don't have good schools. If you don't have a fiscally responsible school district, next thing you know, you're going to be facing bond measure after bond measure to raise your taxes, to pay for their fiscal, malfeasance. And so it matters. It really does matter. In many cases, we don't have a lot of say, frankly, at the state level. And depending on these ultra blue areas, if you have someone incumbent in, they're going to stay in. You're right. You have a lot more say and influence over local politics than you think. And so school board is definitely something to get involved in and pay attention to. And if you want to find out more about me or to support me, you can go to zachrison.com, ZACHRESON.com. I have about me, and I do have a donate button in case you feel so inclined.
Damn, you took my line from me. That was going to be my next point. Was okay.
You can say it again. You can reiterate the
I was going to go into my whole closing spiel. Thanks for coming on, blah, blah, blah. Where can we find everybody? I do that at the end of every show, but
Sorry.
I guess take it away, Jonathan. Why don't you just take us out? Play us out.
Well, thank you for having me. Yeah, you can find me at Jay Zachrison on Twitter. Same thing with Facebook. It's just at Zachrison. I do have Instagram now. It's just reposting, I think, what I say on Facebook. But you find me there, and my website again, zachrison.com. So hey, when you're running for office, I got these things. These things add up, right? These signs. I got yard signs. Those things add up. So I'm getting less and less shy about asking for contributions because they're necessary to be successful in a campaign. So maybe that's why I jumped the gun there a little bit.
You were very anxious to ask for it. That's fine. I've talked to plenty of candidates who say the same thing. People think mailers are cheap, and it's not. Those materials are not cheap, and they are crucial to winning, though. Not just having 100,000 followers on Instagram is not going to win you elections. So for all those people who think social media influencers are going to win elections, that's not how it works. You have to get out. You have to do the ground game. You have to do the mailers. You have to get your name out there, and that costs a lot of money. So if you want to help out, if you're listening, you want to listen to someone who is going to be a great candidate for school board, knows a lot about education. Maybe someday he'll move up the ranks more in education in California. We can only hope. Go check out Jonathan's site. So now I'll kick it over to Cynthia. Cynthia, where can people find you and your thoughts and everything that's going on?
You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. You can just search me up Cynthia Kaui. So it's CYNTHIA. And then my last name is Kaui, KAUI.
Cynthia is a savage on Twitter, so she's a good follow. If you want all her savage takes on everything, just go follow her on Twitter.
She is.
I'm fiery, but mostly
and apparently
peaceful.
She's.
Oh, go ahead.
What about your TikTok?
I'm on TikTok too.
Oh, she's on TikTok as well, so go follow her over there. And to everyone who tuned in tonight, I'll play us out. It's okay, Jonathan. I won't put you on the spot. For everyone who was listening tonight, as always, like I say, if you like this show, make sure you like, share, subscribe, review. If you're watching on YouTube, leave a like and a comment. Helps for the algorithm. And as always, if you like this show, tell one person. That always helps. Tell one person, see if they like it, and spread it around. Because the more people who listen, and you people think that these kind of conversations are important in California, and you think more people should be listening to them and experiencing them, send them to this show. So with that, thanks for tuning in. Stay cool, everybody. Have a good night.